brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth. Welcome everyone to the Labyrinth. Today's show is going to be on a topic that has been discussed throughout the mystical community for thousands of years. Literally, thousands of years. And that has been brought up on the show probably a half dozen times or so. I've alluded to it. I've kind of promised to do this show more than once, more than 100 times to be really honest. Today is going to be Evocation and Invocation. Now, most people get these two confused or messed up or don't even really know the real definitions of the words. So the very first thing we've got to do is hit on what evocation and invocation are, and then to getting into the nature of them, the differences, the dangers, the applications, and to kind of get you ready for a couple future shows that will discuss some of these topics. So the very first thing, what is the difference between evocation and invocation? We know they have a lot to do with ceremonial magic or mysticism that makes use of ceremony. Oftentimes, in fact, you could say all of the time, they have to do with working with spirits. Which, I guess you could say vocation is the art of working with spirits, which makes all jobs a spiritual thing. But no, realistically, invocation is the bringing of a spirit into the self, bringing it into the body and working with it on a very internal level so that it gains some level of control over your body, over your actions, and there's a bit of blurring of the line between these two, and I'll get into that later, hopefully. Evocation is the bringing of a spirit to the here and now, to a place, sometimes in a circle, sometimes in an item, sometimes just into the room, depending on the method that you're using. Now, with that said, you know, what is evocation really? Well, there are a lot of schools of thought as to what evocation is. And I know I just gave the definition of it, but when I say there are a lot of schools of thought as to what it is, what I'm really saying is that there are a lot of explanations as for why it works the way it does, what you're really experiencing. And some people will tell you that you're tapping into some kind of cosmic awareness or universal consciousness or some part of your psychology. Some people will tell you that you're tapping into an external spirit or spirits or demon or deity or whatever, okay? And ultimately the truth is, yeah, it may very well be any of those things. It may be any of those things, and it may be none of those things. And we are more than willing for anyone who's got, photographic evidence to send in a photograph, photoshopped, of your proof of what evocation or invocation really is. What it is you're tapping into, what it is you really don't remember. Send us your photoshopped image to koahosts@koaaxiom.com. And, we'll, laugh. We will laugh. We will laugh all day long. We really will. I will especially. You put in your subject matter to the Labyrinth host or to Charles, because I could use a good laugh. Really, I could. So, we kind of got an idea that it's something that we really don't understand. You're probably going to be dealing with anything that you evoke in a very sensory-based. You may be in trance. You may hear a voice echo in your mind very faintly. You may see signs that something is there by things happening in the room, like lights going on or off, things of that nature. If you have candles set up, they may start to flicker in a way that is not, predictable or standard. Air currents in a room can change. Temperature may change. Any number of things may happen, or none of that. You may just get a really strong feeling that you have brought there what it is you're trying to bring. And that's good. That's part of what evocation is, because you're bringing this to the area. It's not going to take over with luck. With luck, evocation does not bleed into invocation. If your evocation is bleeding into invocation, you are in the wrong vocation at the time. You should consider switching jobs, become an invoker instead of an evoker. Popular methods of evocation. There are a lot of them. Man, every method of mysticism in the world. Everybody has a method of evocation. You know, my favorite is the Knights of Awakening method, where when we want to get something done, we evoke Justin Bane and we beat the crap out of him till he does what we want him to do. Come on now, get to it. Ah! There we go. That is my favorite method of evocation, to be really honest. That's the method we like. No, that's bull. Honestly, most forms of evocation are some form of ceremonial. There are ways to do it without ceremony. There are ways to do it without ritual. And ceremony and ritual being any action, any formulaic method that you have described, any time you've set down these methods to do this. And almost every method outside of that is raw instinct and raw use of power, and you can evoke through that. And that's the method I prefer. But some of the methods that are used are Enochian magic or high magic, which are not completely synonymous, but many times are very synonymous. They're both forms of thaumatic magic, which is a system of its own. Golden Dawn makes use of a system like this. And effectively, just to hit on those really quickly, that's the basis of Western mysticism. The idea being you're going to use symbols, you're going to use sets of actions representing a thing, you're going to channel power, and in that you're going to bring something here and lock it down in an area, and you're going to make demands of it. Wicca makes use of it to some degree. I should say requests or demands, depending on the spirit, the entity, your alignment to it, its alignment to you, how you think of each other, what you intend to do, you know? A lot of people have asked how I got to be such a spiritual juggernaut, and evocation was one of the first methods I learned, but I really didn't have anything I wanted the spirits to go after for me, so I tended to summon, whatever dark demon I could get a hold of, and then practice energy work trying to blast the crap out of it. I became really good at forms of mystical attack through that, but not so much a really great evoker. Most things will show up when I call for them, reluctantly. Reluctantly anymore. And that's another method of using evocation. Not the suggested one. Prayer is another form of evocation. You are bringing contact to something outside of yourself and working with it. And that is the nature of evocation. It's working with any entity outside of yourself, instead of internal, instead of bringing it inside and letting it express itself through you. And why are these methods classified as evocation? Because none of them, as a rule, and this is not entirely true, in Wicca and in various pagan groups, invocation has become a lot more popular over the years. And in some Christian groups, some Christian spiritualist groups, invocation is used. But for the most part, almost all of these methods that I've listed of spellcraft, of mysticism, really rely on working with something outside of yourself. Everything from the basic rhyme spell, beseeching Zeus for wealth, beseeching Athena for wisdom, beseeching Aphrodite for sex, every one of these is gonna be working with it outside of yourself. I mean, unless you really are that bad at your job, or you really are just that tired of being the one to go to work. I suppose you could invoke Zeus, or you could invoke another god or deity or spirit, invoke Michael the angel into your body, and then have them go to work for you. I wouldn't recommend it. But ideally, you're going to work with these things through evocation if you want them to do something for you. Notice that what we're dealing with is a play of getting something achieved outside of your own actions, outside of your own self, outside of your own initiative, outside of the spell itself. You use up a lot of energy to do this. You really do. And it does work with the law of attractions. I believe that the spirit world works with the concept of creating linking, mental linking, spiritual linking, so that things are brought to you or you're moved to things in ways. But, and it's a big but on this, with any of these evocations, the reason we're doing this classification with these things is because that's where the limit stops. You're not going to evoke something and have a complete conversation with it. And like I said, the line kind of blurs, and I said I'd hopefully hit on that. And I will. I'll hit on that actually as the midway point of going into invocation. But, when you're using evocation, you want something. You want a better job. You want a new house. You want a better car, or a new car, or a car all in all. You want a raise, or you want a cheeseburger. I don't know. I don't care. Whatever it is you want something to bring it to you, or you want it to work towards getting this thing for you. So you're going to evoke it and send it on a task. Have it work for you to achieve things. That is evocation. That is the basics of evocation. You always have a task. Even if it's just healing. Even if it's healing your body, providing you inspiration, you can have them bring these things. That is evocation also. We're getting very close to that blurred line. The dangers of evocation. We'll wrap up on that for the evocation and move to invocation and the blurred line first. Dangers of evocation really begin with the fact that you are now entrusting part of your life, part of the lives of those around you, into the hands of something you may or may not know too much about. You're giving something else the keys. You're giving something else the steering wheel and the gas pedal, and you're telling it go drive. You're giving it the car that is your life, and you're telling it to take you somewhere and see where you wind up. Well, that has some risk. If these things are outside of your subconscious, outside of your will, there's always the chance they'll move you where they want you, not where you want them to move you to, or they'll bring to you what they want for you, and not whatever it is you think you want for yourself. If these things are subconscious manifestations, if they are simply a part of you doing this with your own energy in this way, you're in just as deep a load of crap if it messes up, because there are parts of you that could make the decision to do things you don't want them to do. And then you will be up a certain creek without a paddle. What can I tell you? There's a risk with all forms of magic of any kind of backfire effect. If you're going to play with fire, you got to risk getting burned. And this goes with everything from ritual ceremony to basic prayer. There's the potential for these things to mess up. And you may wind up saying, wow, yeah, that was really unlikely that things like this should have happened. But here I am, and this is the way it's getting taken care of. And that may be not exactly what you were hoping for. Now, the blurred line, when evocation and invocation start to mix. This is where you call something into yourself. You're in a very deep trance, a meditative state, and you have a conversation with something totally within yourself. You create a world internal, you go into the world internal, and you work internally with something. You bring it into your spiritual self, your spiritual inner realm, to deal with it. And that is a bit of a risk. It's a bit of a risk. I'm not going to go into the technique overly much, except to say that any evocation you can do, either through force of will or through ceremony, can be done in a transcendental state, in a meditative world, where you have created a world inside your own spirit and inside your own mind, and it can be just as effective, if not more so. And when you do this, it borders on invocation and evocation. It's a little bit of both, because you are pulling them into your sphere, your sense of self. But you're not pulling them so far in that you're giving them control. Which gets us into invocation. Yes, that's right. Invocation, the method in which one brings a spirit, deity, god, goddess, entity, ghost, angel, demon, damn it, I don't care what, into themselves, and it begins to manifest its personality, as well as sometimes its abilities, skills, what have you. Invocation is talked about less in mysticism than evocation because it's not really as flashy, and you do it and people tend to look at you like you've lost your goddamn mind, and for good reason. When people start talking outside of their normal experience, when they start having changes in voice patterns, when they start acting differently, it tends to set people off. Invocation is one of those things that really does generate some worry for the person observing the invoker. Especially if they're not used to dealing with these things, it can be really quite a shock to the system for someone to invoke an angel or a deity or a demon into their body. It really can change the way people perceive what's going on. And the thing is, what you're doing is you're turning off that part of you that keeps control over you, and you're moving into observation mode while you allow something else to run the body. You are bringing it into yourself. You are becoming somewhat one with it. I say somewhat one with it because there's always the ability to pull the plug. The only time you don't have the ability to pull the plug is if you're already very weak-willed or weak energetically, in which case, what the hell are you doing this for? You should be going back to the first episodes where I told you to meditate all the time and build up energy and be strong enough to deal with this. Because if you are easily taken control of, you have not built sufficient energy reserves of your own, and that's just not going to fly. You shouldn't even be doing this. But if you are doing this, and you have built up the reserves to deal with this, ideally, what you're doing with invocation is you're bringing something outside to the end and giving it the wheel, giving it some control. And it's just not as functionally useful as evocation. Very few times am I there being, man, I wish I was someone else. Now, the other side of that is some people are natural invokers for certain deities or spirits. Some people are natural evokers for certain entities. And the result is, when you need that entity to help with a situation, invocation may be many times more effective than evocation. But I don't know. It really depends on what you need from it. When it comes to getting the job done, evocation is almost always as beneficial as invocation, except maybe in the need for information. When you need, or someone else needs, in this case, you're not going to get it. You're not going to be completely in control. Someone else needs information, or they need the perspective of that entity. Then invocation starts to make a little bit more sense. Examples of invocation would be speaking in tongues, channeling, medium work often makes use of invocation. Some people make use of invocation for their tarot card readings or runes. Other people make use of invocation just to pass the time. And some people use a kind of a unification invocation, which is called becoming an avatar. And that, it's more you take on the traits. You become one with the entity, and therefore you gain its traits and some of its character traits, but you're still firmly in control. That's a slightly different form of invocation. And again, it's useful also, I guess, for the power boost. If the entity that you're summoning in has more raw potential power than you do, outside of your body and in the ability to affect the world around you, I guess I could say, yeah, that would be a use for invocation. That would be a point in time. Now, we're going to get into some other areas with invocation, some other things you can do, and we're also going to hit on the avatar idea again. And then we're going to wrap it up and announce a couple other shows that are going to be coming up on the Labyrinth involving the similar topic. But, you know, we got to hit the dangers first of invocation, because it really is worth hitting the dangers of invocation. What are the dangers? What are the dangers of this? You know, what is it that can happen? You know, why is this so hush-hush in the mystical community? Why do people run away screaming from it? Well, because there are some psychological risks. You can develop multiple personality disorder in an uncontrolled form, or in any form. Going from singular personality to multiple would probably not be optimal. You could develop the inability to determine reality from fantasy, from spiritual to physical. And I hate to group fantasy and spiritual together, and that's why I'm not. I specifically consider spiritual to be a physical result in a physical realm. But at the same time, there is that subset of humanity that can't get outside of its own head. And that is always a risk. That is always a danger. And invocation, to some degree, may encourage that. You know, you may wind up not being sure who you are, or what you're doing. And such uncertainties can lead to an uncertain, unstable, unpredictable, and not beneficial life. So, invocation has like a whole lot of warning signs on it because it is really risky. It is the most dangerous thing you can do in mysticism that is practiced widely. And yet, if you're firmly rooted and grounded, you meditate frequently and you ground yourself, and you keep a good psychological analysis of yourself, really know who you are, invocation is no more dangerous than lighting a cigar. Lighting a cigar is a fairly dangerous thing if you're a dumbass or an idiot. You catch yourself on fire, don't blame the Knights of Awakening or the Labyrinth. You know, that's your own damn fault. So, when people go to do invocation, how do they do it? Because we went over evocation, use of ceremonies, calling forth something, using symbols and linking and pouring energy into it. Invocation can be done with all of that, but primarily, the main thing is to start to synchronize your thoughts and your energy with another entity's. And then give up the control to that entity. Allow it to run things. Give up your sense of self to it. Now, there's some other options for invocation, and this is where we go into avatar invocation techniques. These are the ideas that I was hitting on, the safer variations of invocation. And a basic one would be elemental invocation, taking on the emotional, philosophical, energetic, and overall spiritual properties of an element. This could be useful, especially if you need change in your life. Taking on the properties of fire could be useful. Fire could also be useful for healing. Taking on water if you need more adaptability, or healing is another good one. All of the elements have some healing to them. Fire and water are the two biggies for healing. A lot of people like earth for healing, and I can see why. Earth would be for grounding, stability of self, immovability, you know, just raw by the God's strength. Yeah, earth is a nice one. It's one I don't use very often personally either. I probably need to work on that more. Wind is better for rapid adaptability, vitality, liveliness, inspiration, and destructive power, to be honest. Very few things on this earth are as destructive as the wind when it gets a burr up its ass. So, you know, invoking these elements, you take on the properties, you gain an ability to work with that element and what it's connected to in a more in a more advanced way, in a more, really not advanced, but empowered way, because you take on the element. Invocation of concepts. You become the champion of justice, the avatar of avarice. You could become any of these, any concept can be invoked. And you can, to some degree, take on its properties. This ideal, this function. But this also takes on all of the outside orbital concepts. For instance, if you were to take on the concept of greed, you would become very taking, very wanting, but you would also become very lustful. You become very worldly, very seeking of the world. You could invoke that as an entity. This can also be useful for writing. For those that are writers out there, taking on these things and then letting them kind of guide your fingers as you're writing can improve your writing skills. It lets you come from a different perspective, which is another reason you could take on the elements or concepts. Parts of yourself. With concepts, I guess greed kind of hit on that. I guess strength would have been better, but almost all concepts exist within the self. Taking on parts of yourself, though, are things like the shadow self, which we've discussed in other episodes. I'm not going to get into a big deal of it. I'm just going to say that, we all have our darker side, and you can choose to personify it and then invoke it. Taking on your lighter self, taking on your higher self, and then invoking it. Taking on your soul sword, its traits, and invoking it. At this point, you're becoming one. You're becoming an avatar. At the same time, to hybridize this, you could also become an avatar through invocation methods, like I said, that mid-ground of a particular god or deity. Or of the very source of energy itself, if that's what you sought to do, of the life force flowing through all of us. You have those options to become an avatar thereof, and that is a form of invocation. So, where's all this going? Well, we're going to be doing follow-up shows on invocation and evocation. And one of them will be on mental constructs and evocation. Yep, I think I'll probably do that one as the next one for you, because it's really a neat idea. It's a really great concept. And it's functional. It really is. Beyond that, we're also going to be looking at fictional characters and how they invoke power, to give you some ideas on how you can invoke some power of your own. And we'll be hitting on invocation and the invocation of power therein in that. So, I thank you all for joining. It's been great, and as always, awaken the night within.